The transpersonal domain, just understand that there's like an ego, like we're in these egos, but maybe there's a different level of connectivity or unity that we just don't perceive from our limited
But
perspective.
traditional psychology has basically a cartography of the psyche that's limited to postnatal biography and the Freudian individual unconscious, which is also a derivative of postnatal biology, things that we repress, that we've forgotten, that are unacceptable, that we rejected. And Freud believed that the psychological history begins after you're born. There was no, except a short time when he considered that maybe the roots of anxiety are in birth.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just a very fleeting kind of an idea that Otto Rank then later developed. But basically, the mainstream psychiatry has a model of the psyche that's limited to the postnatal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Freud talked about the newborn as tabula rasa, as a clean
Mm-hmm.
slate. And when we started working with psychedelics, the map has to be vastly expanded. So when I was putting together this new cartography, I added what I call the perinatal level, because I found out there is a complete record of the whole passage through the birth canal, all the emotions, all the physical sensations.
So what's the definition of the perinatal? So.
Well, perinatal is a term that literally means peri means around, and natalis is pertaining to childbirth. So experiences that have connection with birth, that reflect experiences that happened immediately before birth, during birth, and immediately after birth. And then there was this vast other domain that I called transpersonal, transcending the personal altogether. And those would be the experiences of identifying with other people, identifying with animals, experiencing group consciousness, transcending time, going back to other centuries, other countries, sometimes with this sense of personal remembering, and then people call it past life experiences, and also excursions into the archetypal, into the mythological, Jungian realm.
Can you give an example? Because I remember some beautiful ones from your books about people kind of accessing information. I think there was one about this woman who began to sort of offer this prayer in like some medieval Spanish dialect or something, and then you had it recorded, and later on were able to see what it was. I mean, something like that, where you had kind of like this experience.
Yeah, this happened actually in the holotropic breathwork in one of the SLN workshops, where a woman came who had been suffering for years of pretty severe depression. She got up in the morning. It took her a long time to get going. And in this workshop, she first went to birth, and then there was a very powerful episode where she went through birth to a situation where she suddenly sat up and then started a kind of a very repetitive prayer in a language that none of us understood, and in a very, very kind of evocative way. And people from the group just really responded to it, and they sat down, and most of them in a meditative position, and some of them crying. It was a very, very emotional scene, and nobody knew what was happening. And there happened to be a psychoanalyst from Buenos Aires. And when she finished this, she sort of lay back and she was in bliss. And that was the end of her depression. And he was just enormously impressed. He came to us and says, "Do you understand what happened?" We said, "No." And he said she was chanting in perfect Sephardic language, which is a mixture of medieval Spanish and Hebrew, a language that she didn't know. She didn't even know ordinary Spanish, but he was Jewish and it just happened to be his hobby, so he knew the language. So we said, "What was she saying?" And he said, "Well, she was saying, I am suffering and I will always suffer. I am crying and I will always cry. I'm praying and I will always pray." And it's a mystery to me, until this day, how that could have cured her depression, to spend, some time repeatedly chanting these few sentences. And it's, one of the examples how sometimes completely mysterious healing mechanisms become available in these states.
And some of the work you did with this perinatal phases, the matrices, you began to divide them into different, through your clinical observations, these different phases where different kind of things would take place. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I noticed that when people regressed to birth, that the experiences were coming in kind of four very distinct experiential clusters: specific emotions, specific physical feelings, specific symbolism, which was associated, and people themselves were linking it to the consecutive stages of birth. So I started talking about these experiential clusters as basic perinatal matrices. So the first matrix, there are four of them. The first matrix is related to the episode when the fetus is still in the womb, prior to the onset of the delivery, good or bad womb, depending on what was happening there. And the second matrix is related to the situation where the delivery starts, the uterus contracts, cuts off the blood supply during the contractions, and the cervix is not open yet, so the child is trapped in this kind of claustrophobic, no exit situation where no oxygen is coming in during the contractions, no nourishment, no elimination of the toxic metabolic products. Yeah? That's one of the worst experiences that we can have if the regression takes us there. And then when there's the dilation of the cervix, then there is this slow propulsion through the birth canal, and that's the third matrix. So what's very interesting in the third matrix is that there is, of course, the situation which is the same as in the second matrix. The uterus keeps contracting and cutting off the oxygen, but the way out is now not completely blocked. So there is this struggle to get out, to free oneself, powerful clashing energies and so on. And what's interesting that in that stage, the suffocation also generates a kind of a powerful arousal that involves energy that's either sexual or very, very similar to sexual energy. So people get a lot of sexual imagery, not the best of sex, not the Romeo and Juliet type of sex, but the sex of the underworld, the aberrant sex, and so on. And then there's a transition between the third and the fourth matrix, is the actual emerging into the world, and that's its experience as actually death and rebirth. The old is dying, and one is emerging into light, white light, golden light. There could be peacock design, there could be rainbow designs, there could be archetypal deities emerging in light, Great Mother Goddess, and so on.
So the whole process sounds a little bit like the process of like a shamanic initiation in a way.
Well, in my understanding, the shamans make a perinatal journey. What the anthropologists call the shamanic illness, and we call, shamanic initiatory crisis, the beginning of the career of many shamans, archetypically involves the visionary journey into the underworld and being exposed to major ordeals, tortures, attacks of evil spirits, and so on. And then it ends up in dismemberment, in annihilation, and then it turns around and there's rebirth. The shaman has the experience of getting new flesh, new blood, new eyes, and then the experience of the magic flight, which has some variations from culture to culture. It could be being transformed into a solar bird, like an eagle or thunderbird or condor, and flying into the supernal realms, or it could be being carried by a bird like that. It could be climbing a world tree, or climbing a rainbow pole with a certain number of notches and so on.
Do you think
And
that
then in the process, they typically heal themselves from various emotional, psychosomatic diseases. Anthropologists call them wounded healers. But not only that, but they learn how to heal. So it's kind of a crash course in healing. And what they learn is energetic healing. That's the essence of the shamanic work, although many shamans can have also knowledge of sort of naturalistic remedies, of herbs and so on. But the essence is really to unblock energies. The blocked energies are conducive to disease and problems. And if you can, like in Chinese medicine, if you can make the vital energies flow, that's conducive to healing.
Question for you is, do you think on a meta level, we could say that maybe our civilization or society is in a kind of perinatal crisis at this point?
Many people get that insight in psychedelic sessions, also spiritual emergencies, or in the holotropic breathwork sessions, that we have, in a way, sort of enacted in the world now all the major problematic elements that you would encounter during the inner journey, primarily as part of the third matrix. When you see sort of unleashing of violent images, unleashing a lot of sexual images. You experience what I call scatological images, sort of encountering biological material that we consider dirty normally. So the idea is that we have projected all this and we are experiencing it. And as in psychedelic sessions, it's essential to keep it internal, to confront it, rather than acting it out, because then instead of ego death, you can kill yourself. And so the idea is that we are involved in this race where either number of people will be able to turn this into an internal process, and then the human species can move to a completely different level of consciousness and awareness, or we keep projecting it, enacting it in the external world, and we might destroy ourselves.
How do you think we're doing?
So, yeah. But I think there are things happening on other levels, not just what meets the eye necessarily.
Right.
You know, the first amazing thing that happened, that we recognized that what I described as the phenomenology of the four matrices, it's like reading passages from an astrological book. The first matrix about Neptune, the second about Saturn, the third one about Pluto, and the fourth about Uranus. But then the next step was even more amazing when we found out that actually people have the experiential confrontation with those matrices at the time when they have those planets as transiting planets.
Wow.
So, and we found out that you can actually predict the content of psychedelic experiences or holotropic experiences in general astrologically. Not in a concrete way, but the quality of archetype, the archetypal field that the person will be in. And then within that field, they can have either biographical experiences or corresponding matrix, perinatal matrix, or let's say past life experience, or the archetypes themselves.
Doesn't that kind of point towards some really almost like future like science of consciousness, where we could actually?
I believe that that psychology would become something very, very different, very much more effective, and psychiatry as well, if it combines responsible work with non-ordinary states and transit astrology as a sort of guiding principle.
Hard for most people, even in this community, I think, to really take that in yet, or to really accept that.
It's amazing that CIS, California Institute of Integral Studies, allowed these courses because they bring together two very controversial, academically controversial areas, psychedelics and astrology.
Yeah, I think that your work is some of the most important of our time. I really do. It's really exciting. I mean, I like what Tarna said in that book about how you kind of brought Freud and Jung together in a certain sense. Was that something that was consciously kind of part of your mission, or?
No, I was trained as a pretty traditional Freudian.
Right.
My analyst used to say he's probably more Freudian than Freud himself, which is he just accepted the early Freud, not when he started moving into Thanatos. And so he was quite orthodox. He wouldn't shake hands with me because this would contaminate the transference, counter-transference relationship. And so appreciation for Rank and Jung came really from the psychedelic work.
There's I read this book by this guy Gerald Hurd. He was like a guy in the 40s,
Yeah,
Pain, Sex, and Time.
He was a friend of Aldous Huxley.
Oh, was it? It was a fabulous book. But one thing he said in the book was, just as it was like so hard for people like in the 19th century to give up God and to cut themselves off from religion, and it was so painful, it's equally painful for people to like go back to taking the possibility of like consciousness or these other dimensions. It's like a whole nother thing that they can't quite manage to do.
But I think what happened during the scientific and industrial revolution, that certain scientific discoveries were made that were turned into technological inventions that started changing the world, and people were tremendously impressed now with the reason can be. And then everything that was not rational was sort of not only banned but kind of ridiculed. The kind of embarrassing leftover from the dark ages or from the childhood, infancy of humanity. And I think the problem that occurred here is that, you see, not everything that's not rational is irrational. There are areas where you can talk about transrational things. The mystics are not irrational, they are transrational. They can perfectly function rationally. I mean, they can operate in the everyday world at least as good as everybody else. But in addition, they made certain corrections in their worldview based on the experiences of other realms that are not available in the ordinary state of consciousness. So they have what other people have plus something that is added. And I hate the term altered states of consciousness, though I love Charlie Tard who coined it, because it suggests that there's some kind of a distortion happening.
But what do you think?
That is a correct way of experiencing yourself and the world, and in these states that it's distorted. But if you have those experiences, you get a very different sense. You get a sense that now you got a part of your understanding of the world that was missing before. You have suddenly a fuller, more complete understanding of existence. Not that you get a distorted version of existence.
What do you think an evil spirit is?
What an evil spirit is?
What is an evil spirit? If somebody has an experience through shamanic initiation, other states of consciousness of being visited by an evil spirit.
It's part of the phenomena that exist in the collective unconscious. Archetypal deities, restful, blissful deities, as you find them in different mythologies of the world, and then you have sort of realms of discarnate entities and
so they have
spirit guides. I mean, this is all part of the transpersonal world of the collective unconscious.
Would potentially some kind of spirit like that have a kind of volition and will and intention of its own, or is it more like it's a projection of the psyche, of our psyche, or the collective psyche?
It depends on who you think you are. If you think you're your body ego, then it's out there. If you would believe that, like the Hindus, ultimately that you are Brahma, then everything is an aspect of you. That Tibetan exercises that would evoke these visions of evil entities, and then the next step you learn that they are basically extensions of your own mind. You expand your consciousness to the point that you include them. In what's interesting in the transpersonal world, that anything that in your everyday world experienced as an object out there has a corresponding subjective state. You can experience yourself as a sequoia tree, where your body is a sequoia tree, where your body image will be that of a sequoia tree. You will feel the sap circulating, you will experience the photosynthesis, you will experience the exchange of water and minerals and you know, it extends also into the transpersonal world. I mean, you can encounter the dancing Shiva. You can also experience yourself as being the dancing Shiva. You can experience encountering the Great Mother, and you can become the Great Mother. And so I call these states the shaman's experience, or the native culture's experience in rites of passage, or the initiate's experience in the mysteries, or the yogis, Buddhists, Taoists, Sufis, and so on. I call them holotropic. Holos means whole, and trepein means moving towards something, moving towards wholeness. And you find in these states that we really don't have ultimately fixed identity. You can experience yourself as anything that's part of creation, and it can ultimately take you to the point where all boundaries appear relative, negotiable, and you can experience yourself as the creative principle itself. And that's you know, what's written in the Upanishads. The question, who are you? And the answer is tattvamasi. It's usually translated archaically, thou art that, you are it, you are not nama rupa, you are not name and shape, you are not a Newtonian object, you are not a human being, you are Brahma, you are the creative energy of the universe. Not you or me, but anybody. We are all sort of, you know, our individual consciousness is teased out of this large cosmic matrix, so that the most interesting message from these states is there's only one consciousness, only one subject in the universe that has the capacity to create split units of consciousness, and the boundaries never are absolute, they are negotiable, they can be transcended.
What do you think of the whole 2012 kind of concepts? You know, like that's what I wrote about in my last book. And you know, if we've begun to recognize that like shamans and indigenous knowledge systems have validity, and actually, you know, we're not just superstition, but actually had some kind of access. And you had a culture like the classical Maya who were like so focused on some sort of transformation, consciousness change happening maybe at this period. I mean, does it resonate with you at all, or what do you think about this concept?
No, when you come you have the Hopi prophecies, you have the Mayan concept. I think we have it, we know about it. The interpretations vary. For example, whether it's going to be really the end of the world, or whether it's going to be more like a death rebirth, like a, you know, death of the old order and emerging into some other level of consciousness.
What do you think?
I think we'll see when we get there. There are two different ways of thinking about it. One is that these things are sort of happening, and the shamans or the Mayans have sort of this amazing capacity to see the future. I like better the Hindu concept of Maya. That this is the whole thing is a divine play that has a script, master script, and in that case it would make for a good story.
Right.
That ancient Mayans were able to predict.
Yeah. Well, and of course the name is interesting. Also, their name is the Maya, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of like a cosmic puzzle or something.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Our consciousness can create realities. I mean, if you are in a psychedelic session, you can be in a world that's very, very convincing. And so, after all I have experienced, to me, it's not so impossible that the consciousness was able to create the experience of the material world. You know, maybe 20 years from now, when the technology of virtual realities will be improved, it will be very clear to us that just because you experience something, it doesn't have to be there. You know, you can create worlds by orchestration of experiences.
So you think in a way...
You can already fool the eye. You can have a good movie, three-dimensional color, you know, great sound. You can have holophonic sound. What we cannot do, we can fool the tactile sense. Yeah, that's our last criterion. You can create a good hologram that would fool you. You know, when first holograms came, there was a jeweler in New York City who had in his, as part of his window, shop window, projective hologram that was showing a hand reaching into the street, and there was a pearl necklace, and you could see people coming and sort of, you know, grabbing, and then the hand goes through. It's not there. It's just a picture. Now, if you now could fool, if you could fool the tactile sense that as you are going for it, then you get a specific sensation, and then you also, if it's a solid object, if it stops your movement, you cannot go any further. There's no way you could tell whether it is a virtual reality or
so you think our technology might almost be pushing us towards that ancient mystical insight in a way?
Yeah, and you know, and modern technology could really emulate now a lot of the phenomena that are known as CD, psychic. You know, I mean, you can have a cell phone and decide to talk to anybody, or you can see anybody in the whole world. You know, you can talk with them, you can see them. So it's, you know, you can make something happen on Mars. You know, you can sort of guide a vehicle on Mars. So it's very close to psychokinetic ability. It's just that you have some kind of gadget operating there. Does that make much difference?
When you had your vision of Egypt, what were you doing in Egypt? Are you continuing the same line of work today, or?
Well, you know, I had part of the experience came in a psychedelic session, and then I also had a kind of a hypnotic session with my friend Pauline McCurrick. I'm writing about it also in the book, When the Impossible Happens, when I sort of completed the story. And part of the story was that in that Egyptian incarnation, I had the knowledge of what was happening in the Isis-Osiris death rebirth mysteries. And then as I was dying as a result of kind of a betrayal and poison, that I somehow was so filled with emotions about the situation that I was not able to apply that in any way to my own dying. And that in this lifetime I suddenly had this insight, and whether it's true or not, that's another story. But I had the feeling that sort of much of my present lifetime was geared towards sort of recovering that lost knowledge and sort of put it in some form that corresponds to present circumstances. But it was all those were death rebirth mysteries, you see. So formulating in modern terms somehow all the essential elements that were happening there. So when I was looking back at my life, I remembered where I was sort of reading as an adolescent. So every time I would read something that had some relationship to this whole area, you know, my heart would start pounding sort of faster. And, I felt like a hound, bloodhound, you know, that is now tracing something. And then when I had my first LSD session, it just all came together. I felt this was the way, although I didn't specifically link it to Egypt until much later. And again, you know, I don't take any of these things as proofs of anything. But it's a very plausible story for me.